Hi, Evan. Welcome to Venture with Grace. We're live, by the way.
Hey, great seeing you.
Okay, so let's start with, like previously we met at dinner and you have, I think the time that I met you, you were like just like started pivoting on edge like direction. Let's start with what you were working on back then, and then I guess how did you kind of like find out like the pattern, in like not find out about the patent industry.
Sure.
I know that you've been like working with patent for years. Let's say how did you like find out how do you like come up with like a direction of like what you want to build, and yeah, we can go from there.
No, totally. I mean, let's talk about it. Just for slight context, what Edge does is an AI platform for people who want to write patents. So our customers are
Mhm.
lawyers, but the lawyers can be at a company or they can be at a law firm. It doesn't really matter. It just matters that they're or patent agents. It's just that they're writing patents. That's the thing that's really important there. So the way we got here, so we actually went through my co-founder and I, Y Combinator. Um, we were super lucky to go through YC. We went through YC with a very different idea. So what we were making was essentially Databricks for biology. I still think someone's
What
going
is
to nail.
data bricks for biology?
So here's the basic idea. When you take like a genetic sequence, okay, so like 23andMe, you would think that what happens is that you have a machine and it reads your DNA and that goes to 23andMe, and then they just analyze it, right?
Hmm.
That's actually not what happens. There's a ton of intermediate steps, tons of open source software, people with PhDs just in the topic of like processing the data, and it's the biggest data anywhere. Like there's more genetic data than there's data on YouTube. So um, managing all that data is insane. Like I remember talking to someone at a startup, not a big pharma, a startup that said that they were generating like a petabyte of data a week. So what we realized was that there was this huge mismatch of what was needed for the future of biology and what we were actually and the skills that people actually had, because the PhD sort of not analysis knowledge was very scarce, and none of those people were engineers, so they were making stuff that broke all the time. Excuse me. So our idea was, what if we made a platform that made it so that biologists could focus on biology, and we handled the biology specific data science. And that's why it was like Databricks for biology. It was
Hmm.
this infrastructure that worked a lot with open source. The problem was that fundamentally, um, we were not biologists, and so there was a bit of a trust issue. Did you actually build the right thing? And then there was also the problem of the analysis is actually a pretty short portion of the experiment. Even if you have a guy who's dedicated to it because you're doing so much, this guy is only involved in a small portion of what the experiment is. And so it was very hard for us to get people excited to invest in a really small portion of the experiment, even though it's a really important part of the experiment. So, we were getting customers. We actually had a really, big pharma company that was about to, become a customer. But everything was moving so slow. And we had this crazy experience where we went to this conference called Bio. It's like one of the biggest conferences in the biology world. The only other one that's even close is called JP Morgan. And the weirdest thing happened. We would get meetings with people to talk about our product, which remember is biological data analysis.
Hmm.
And people instead said, "Hey, do you want to talk about patents?" And I'm like, "That has nothing to do with what we do, but okay." And eventually, like half of the people at this conference were more interested in talking with us about their their intellectual property than they were talking about like the actual thing that we were building. And then we were like, okay, maybe there's something else we can do that provides more value to people.
Hmm.
And when we ended up realizing, we spoke to more people. We realized that first of all, it's a bigger market. It's something that we're more equipped to do because, like you mentioned, it's something where I have a lot of background with patents. And plus pivoting is the YC way. So we decided to pivot. It made sense. We basically spent months building it. We announced it before we even had anything. We got people to give us feedback, to agree to be testers. And then eventually we had a product that we felt comfortable charging for. So we started charging for it. And since then, people have been really interested. They've wanted to, pay for it. Even when we go to like legal conferences, it's like a totally different experience. Like going to bio and having half of the people want to talk about something other than what we were doing versus going to a law conference and like pretty much everyone we talk to wanting to get a demo. It's just,
Mm.
yeah, it's a completely different world.
Amazing. I wonder, honestly, I feel like the other thought I had was like, I feel like selling to hospital would be like taking forever, but selling to the legal world, I wonder what does that look like? So since you guys like the major buyer are gonna be like lawyers or some other people, so like how does like the sales cycle looks like for you guys?
Yeah, so they're super different. So with biology data analysis, yes, you can sell to hospitals, which is like a year-long plus process.
Mhm.
You can also sell to biotech startups and pharma companies. And those are actually pretty long. Biotech is shorter. Um, with the legal industry, you're kind of broken up into three categories. You're talking about in-house counsel. Those are lawyers who are hired by companies to cut on costs. So like if you ever worked at a big company like Google or Oracle or something, you probably talked to like a lawyer who's employed by that company. That's in-house. Only
Mhm.
big companies have this. So like if you're a small company, there's no such thing as small company in-house.
Mhm.
And then with law firms, there's kind of the big law firms you've heard of, like Cooley and Wilson. Then there's a huge long tail of small firms. And actually, patent law has a lot of these small firms. Like a majority of practitioners are at these small firms. So the sales cycle is different depending on who you're talking to. The small law firms, they move the quickest. You like give them a trial, it's like 2-3 weeks. If they like it, they buy it. That's pretty much it.
Mhm.
Some people will like it so much they'll pull out the credit card on the call because they're the firm owner. They can do whatever they want.
Wait,
Um,
I have a question there. So like so basically let I mean how big of the ticket it have to be? Is that gonna be like like call it like a six figure or like I mean I feel like I know that like lawyers are very like it's a really like lucrative business and I wonder like how does it like sits under like their budgeting? So is it like over like do they have like a tool budget like you just mentioned like small firm and big firm like
yeah.
different but
So I have a whole spiel on this. So the short answer is,
are
I
you
mean, now,
okay, by the way? I feel
yeah, I'm
like
fine. I just
okay.
I just have a cough that's
Oh,
I've
no.
had this thing sometimes where when I get sick, I'm not sick, but sometimes after I get sick, I just have a little bit of a cough.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
I
I'm
hope
fine.
you feel better.
Thank you. I'm not sick anymore. It's the most annoying part. Um, but that's why I have my YC mug here to.
Oh my god.
Um,
Yeah, we'll talk about YC soon.
oh yeah. So basically, our cost is expensive but not crazy. And obviously, how much you spend with us depends on how many lawyers are going to be using our product. Like if you're a sole practitioner, like you're not talking about an insane amount of money. If you're a big firm and you're going to be buying seats for like 100 lawyers, yeah, I mean it's definitely going to become a six-figure contract. Same thing, by the way, with like an enterprise, right? If you're, some of these in-house departments can get really, really big, and so yeah, you'll be talking about a six-figure contract. Um, so the way that they think about it is that they don't. Until literally like a year ago with AI, you needed nothing to start a law firm. It was people, an office, and like LexisNexis. That's it. Like you're paying for information. And so as a result, like the legal industry is a $1 trillion industry. It's extraordinarily profitable. It's like 90+% gross margins. Because again, like what's your software budget? Microsoft Word. And it's not like you have like hardware inputs, right? Like if you're thinking about like building a jet engine, you have to pay for all this steel. You have to pay for like machines that can extrude complex plastics, etc. It is not welding machines. Like when's the last time a lawyer welded? Not that often, right? So they're not used to paying for software. Actually, for that reason, most software purchasing at bigger firms actually goes to the law librarian. Isn't that strange that the law librarian is actually making the decision on whether or not like you can get an AI tool. But the reason it's that way is because, remember, until recently, all you were buying was information. And these were sort of the designated software experts at the firm. And by the way, like I've met a lot of librarians. They're very like smart people.
Who is
So
law librarians? I only heard about like paralegal partners at law firms. Like, what is law
yeah.
librarian?
So if you're a big firm, there's a lot of resources that you have. And they have to be organized because you want the lawyer, like being a lawyer is basically a job of acquiring very specific legal information quickly, processing it, and then making use of it. And you want to find the stuff that is most helpful to your client. So if you are a lawyer, you need to access cases, you need to access like law review articles, you need to access, like laws. Like it sounds crazy, but there's so much stuff. Like you need a dedicated team. It depends on how big your practice is, obviously, but once you start to get, especially mid-size, you need a person or people to manage all of this information for you and then go out and buy it for you. Like some stuff is obviously free, like laws are obviously free, but actually if you want to pay for a special database that has organized the laws because you need to access them quickly and efficiently, and maybe the government didn't put it out in an easy to read format, which happens a lot, then actually you need to pay for private services. I need people who are checking in on those private services and making sure they satisfy what you need and making sure you're not buying duplicates and so on. So actually they have I know that like people who are not used to the law, like it's like, what do you need this for? But they actually serve a really important job when you think of the fact that, a lawyer can charge $1,000, $2,000 an hour. Like, do you really want that lawyer to be spending time like picking which services to buy, or should they outsource that? So it makes sense to have this law librarian. It actually makes a lot of sense. I think that the thing that I've been trying to convince law firms to change a little bit, and they are changing really fast, is, to include the law librarian in the process because they're the people with the experience buying software, but to include the people who are using it, and also to decentralize it so that not every purchase has to go through the law librarian. So let's think about buying software at a tech company. So what you've seen is a shift to what's called the prosumer model,
Mhm.
where essentially individual engineers, they basically have a credit card. As long as it's not super expensive, they actually are able to buy some of their own software that helps them with their job. So if you think about like how Slack, for example, grew, it was because of the prosumer model. A lot of engineers would say, I'm going to buy for just my team. That's a small enough
Mhm.
purchase. It's not crazy. It's not like breaking any banks. It doesn't mess up anyone else's work, so they
Mhm.
can do it. And then eventually what happens is that you have a bunch of teams that have Slack within an organization, and they reach out and then they get an enterprise license. But for bigger companies, that's not how they do that, right? So sometimes they'll say, I'm going to make this decision for everyone. Or sometimes they'll say, this is an important infrastructure, for example, piece of software. So like the decision of whether or not to buy Databricks versus Snowflake, sometimes that's pushed down, but a lot of times that's actually handled by like a CTO office or a CIO office. And that's kind of how what I'm trying to get, the model I'm trying to get like law firms to adopt. And I speak to a lot of law firms. It's the craziest thing. They'll be buying software from me and simultaneously asking me for advice on how they should overhaul their software buying process. And that's what trust is. That's what a relationship is, right? And so what I tell them a lot is you shouldn't necessarily have to be involved in every purchasing decision at the firm level. Like you shouldn't need to have partner buying for everything. Like you should have check-ins. You should have things that you think are strategic, things that affect everyone. Like LexisNexis versus Westlaw. You should be deciding that at a firm level. You should not be having individuals pulling out the credit card for B Law versus Lexis versus Westlaw. But like my patent drafting software, you should maybe, while the field is evolving, let individual partners or even GASP associates pull out the credit card and make the decision themselves. That's another thing too. Like a junior engineer can actually make a decision if it's a low enough dollar at like a tech firm. At a law firm, the idea of an associate, which is like a junior attorney, the idea of them being able to make a purchase decision on their own, I haven't seen a single law firm that does that. And
Mhm.
I think that's a shame. You should totally limit it. Like it shouldn't be crazy dollars. But like if it directly helps them with their job, let them experiment. Like they're the youngest and the guys who are on a lot of times the most cutting edge. Like you could see something that really helps your whole practice.
Mm. I wonder, so when you're like picking which law firm to go after, do you go for like the relationship law firms first? I know that I think your dad is a lawyer too. And like I wonder how do you pick which law firm to go after first? Do you go after the bigger one, like logo shopping, or would you go after the small individual to get some payment first? And when you are like, so I know that like, there's a lot of like I know that there's like famous like cases about like,
Yeah.
a lawyer using ChatGPT and it failed and kind of like, getting sued for that. And I
Yeah.
wonder like how does AI play into the legal ecosystem right now? And then what do you think would be like the biggest challenge for like AI to kind of disrupt the industry?
Oh, definitely. So I would say your first question is to your first question of who do you sell to first. I think that it's sort of an I'm not sure. There's this really great book called Crossing the Chasm. It's
Mhm,
actually where the phrase early adopter comes from. I think you just have to really just apply that playbook, which is just you reach out to everyone because what actually matters the most is the personality. So I think a very important question you have to ask is how does my product differ by segment? So in our case, it doesn't really differ all that much. If you're
mhm,
writing a patent, it doesn't matter whether you're at a big firm or a small firm or in-house or outside. The job of writing a patent is pretty similar. So what we do is we basically just reach out to people, and it doesn't
mhm,
really matter. We get a lot of inbound, by the way.
mhm,
Like probably half of the people who are customers are people who reached out to us, not people who we
mhm,
reached out to. And we don't spend a cent on marketing. So um, I would say that the most important thing is to talk to people and see, are they just window shopping? Are they just starting to explore? Have they been looking for something? Are they looking to switch from something they're already paying for? And I just think that you have to do, obviously relationships help, but all a relationship does is get you a first meeting. And the truth is that today, I think that there's some limited help that's of limited helpfulness because look, 3 years ago, I would say you have to start with the people you know because lawyers do not like buying things. Today, every lawyer is thinking about how AI is going to change their practice and they believe that it will. They don't know how, they don't know how much. But every lawyer believes it will change their practice somehow. By the way, some people think it will change it for the worse, but everyone believes it. So fundamentally, the thing is just seeing who's going to be the most responsive, who's the most excited, and look, we've got a mix of people at big firms and small firms. Like our first, based on how our pipeline is going right now. Again, we already have paying customers, but our first 30 customers are going to include like small firms, AmLaw 100s, and Fortune 500s. Like it's not like there's a single segment that really dominates
mhm,
in terms of dollars or in terms of quantity. At least right now, it's more the subjective personality of the person and how much they are willing to be early adopters versus how much they are conservative by nature. Now, you also asked about these cases. Now, this is a really important jumping off point too. There's some industries that have to have some subjective or some unique to them procurement steps. I think that the law is one of those. I think they really have to care about confidentiality because you really don't want to mess up attorney-client privilege. That's really bad to mess up. So you just need. It's not that you have to like not use the cloud.
mhm.
That was actually, believe it or not, a fight. Um,
Now use the cloud. What does that mean? So like just don't upload stuff on top of a cloud?
yeah,
Like
like
Google
some
Docs?
a lot of lawyers at the beginning didn't want to do that because no, it's for a real reason, right? So when you get sued, your stuff with your lawyers are protected. But if you
Mhm,
reveal that to people, it's not secret anymore, so they can get it.
mhm,
So there was a question of like, does using a cloud service screw that up? But the answer is obviously not. But I do think that there's a question of diligence. I do think that if you upload it to like megauploads.com.xxx and it turns out they get hacked, like you should have known better. I think that I think that doesn't really count. And so I think
mhm,
that like using Dropbox, they're like a reputable company. They're providing a useful service. I don't think you get in trouble for that. So I do think you have to investigate that. And I think that AI tools don't remove a duty of competence. So these guys who had these cases, they were being lazy. and they weren't using it the right way. And so they got screwed. And I think it's kind of the same thing with us, where as an industry, we have to say, what is AI good at and what is it not good at? What is it more likely to have a hallucination for and what's it not, and so on.
Mhm.
We have to design products around it. I'm sure you can tell I have a lot of like various rants, canned rants. One of them is that I think that the AI industry as a whole, this is not unique to legal tech, is really trying to avoid the act of product design. Like they're basically saying, well, ChatGPT is great. I'm going to just make an AI that's a little more for your industry, and it's just going to be ChatGPT for your industry. And that fucking sucks. Like, what's actually good is you're building a product. AI is part of your product. If you don't do the work of saying, what's an awesome experience for my customer? If you don't do the job of saying, what is the best way to use AI? And by the way, some of these things are going to be on the back end. They're going to be things that customers never see. Like, what are times where I shouldn't be using AI? What are times where a deterministic algorithm that I've done the hard work of writing work better? Like, those kinds of things. You need to really do that work. And AI is not an excuse to be lazy. Like, if you're going to make products, then make a fucking product. Think hard about it, make something that makes sense, and use AI at the right places and the right times.
Mm. I wonder, what do you think can be used by, like, so like you mentioned about like designing the product, right? Can you walk us through like the product designing journey, and then how does AI like play the game in your product and in the patent industry in general? And what is like the patent industry's differences between like a general like business legal contract writing thing versus like the patent industry in itself?
That's a great question. Um, to answer that, I actually want to start with a different product that really inspired us, and that's Notion. So I'm sure a lot of people who listen to this use Notion and have seen Notion's way that they use AI. And by the way, there are some significant differences between how we do it.
Mhm.
But if you think about the Notion product, they have a series of things they've built over the course of a number of years, right? They have, I mean, Notion is basically like a fancy SQL database. So, they kept those
Mhm.
features. And then they said, well, what are the other things that people do in Notion? And then what they did was they used AI to enhance those features. So, for example, they said people write a lot of notes in Notion. So
Mhm.
they created commands that you could use to draft in Notion. Um, and um, contribute to the writing process. They now use AI to help power some of the Notion features. Like if you want to make a chart, AI will actually help you do that. And it'll like go through your notes. It'll say what's important. That is the example of the right way to do it. Why is it the right way to do it? Number one, the user remains in control. It's very obvious what AI is doing and what the user is doing and why AI is doing what it's doing. Number two is that there's product that's non-AI that's purpose-built,
Mhm.
right? The graphing is not done by AI. It's a graphing engine, but they know that you want graphs. And then number three is that it's directly integrated. They're not trying to shoehorn ChatGPT into their product. They've thought about how to use AI for their specific use case. So let's go away from that diversion and talk about
Mhm.
edge. So what we do is we thought, what is the perfect product for patent people? And we've been building that and using AI for the features that help. So I'll give you an example of something. So one of the things that we do is clickable references. So this is an example of something that makes patents super different than like a lot of other areas of law, is that when you write a patent, there's an insane number of references to the point where it's like almost unreadable without it. And also where it adds a lot of time, hours and hours for which you get billed. So we were like, okay, what if we had it create that? So AI will help you draft descriptions of figures, for example, which is normally extremely painful. It takes hours. And with Edge, you can get it done in a few minutes. However, one of the things that we do that is not software is that you may have these clickable references and you may say, well, what was that? I don't remember what figure 12 was. I'm at page 23 right now. What's figure 12? I forgot. And so we make these clickable references in our editor where you can see what figure 12 is. That's purely deterministic. That's not AI. It feeds into our AI feeds into it because the AI helps create those clickable references automatically in the text. And we also have sidebars you can pull on because, look, sometimes you're going to want to write something yourself. So maybe you want to write about how it relates to figure 13, and you want to do it by hand. So you can pull it up on the sidebar and see figure 13 while you're writing. So that's sort of what I mean by what makes us extremely different than everyone else is that we're actually building good software, and AI is essential to what we do. Don't get me wrong, but AI is part of what we do. It feeds into this general product that helps human beings complete a task. And actually, that's one of the reasons that we're doing patents. It's part of it is the story I told you about how when we were at these conferences, people asked us about freaking patents more than what we were actually making. But the other reason is that patents are very different than other areas of the law. It's one of the most complex. It's one of the most technical. It's also one of the ones with the most direct context. You know, when you write a patent, you're told what you're writing a patent for. It's not like you have to consider some other invention that you're also writing. And that's what made it such a great problem to solve. If we can solve this problem, we can solve any problem.
I wonder, okay, so let's say if I want to know more about like, okay, so I know that you have invested in a company and eventually it sold to like Walmart or something, and
Yeah.
then the patent was also involved. Like as an investor, if you invest in a company and then the company, let's say not just like sold or whatever, but like it's more of like, okay, so if a company, I'm not talking about your company, I'm talking about like
Yeah.
a company that like let's say the company failed, but like can they really sell the patent to like a bigger company, let's call it like an Apple of the world? Or like is that like not really happen frequently?
Oh no, it happens all the time. I mean, the way think about it this way,
Mhm.
like there are a lot of acqui-hires that are successful, right?
Mhm.
Um, think about a patent acquisition, intellectual property acquisition the same way. But actually, the difference is that intellectual property acquisition is more likely to actually be value accretive than just an acqui-hire. Because with an acqui-hire, there's sort of a formula that people do of like an engineer is worth a certain number of dollars, millions of dollars. Where the patent, it's unbounded.
Mhm.
Um, Now, in the case of Zkit, which you're talking about, Zkit was by the way not a failing company. Although I will say, like without the patents, it would not have been worth that.
Mhm.
So you can totally get patents. I would just say, you would think, oh, Evan, you have an AI software patent company. You think everyone should get patents. I do not think that at all. I think that you have to be strategic about it. First of all, you have to have appropriate funding. If you do not have the money, do not get a patent because it is not cheap. And more importantly, it takes a lot of time. And so
How
you
much
want,
is it? How much is it to like file a patent? And how
so
long
it's
I
all over the map. Um, if it is complex and you're filing in multiple countries, it'll cost tens of thousands of dollars minimum. If you're a pharma company, you could spend $1 million just on patenting a single idea. Now, what goes into that $1 million is filing in like dozens and dozens of countries and filing patents that are like 200 pages long. Like the pharma industry is not the norm. But if
Mhm.
you're talking about again like like what we did for with Zkit, like the bill for that was tens of thousands of dollars, and also more importantly, the time of the engineers and the founders. That's way more expensive. And so one of the reasons that you want to have that money is because you can save money by doing more of it yourself, but that's a really bad use of founder time. So you want to have the money to comfortably say to an attorney, here, you handle it.
Totally. Okay, so I wonder, so like for let's say when you're designing your own product, like since like a lot of people are already started like chatting with you on like how to like basically file patent and stuff. Like I wonder how do you design like the AI part of it? Because I feel like most of like the current like legal AI companies I've seen are like okay, so you use like their tool slash like a chat GPT equivalent of like their company's chat GPT
Yeah,
basically be like, hey, generate me a business contract. And then they will have like, five lawyer in the background to like kind of like,
yeah,
okay, let's spend like 5 minutes on going over if this is actually legit. And like and basically that's it. And then like you pay a subscription, let's call it like $30 per month, and like you're done. So like how like how exactly is lawyers writing these contracts in the first place in the past? Do they have like a mega template that like they can copy paste? Or in the past, I've personally used like the Rocket Law or something for like
yeah,
some like really non like important agreements like in business, like that's like $5 per contract or per month.
yeah.
So I wonder like how exactly is the like what exactly is the norm in the industry, and like why do you feel like the AI GPT bot of like legal is like not gonna work, and like how do you build it like in a different way, like beside let's say that component, how
Yeah.
do you structure your product offerings?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of the thing that you're describing, and every time I see one of those, I just go. I mean, I actually talked to a guy who used to be in-house at Google, and when we were working on our pivot and looking for feedback, he was like, "Why don't you do ChatGPT for NDAs?" And I'm like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Um, so let's take the
I
example.
just use ChatGPT to do NDAs because I don't know how. Like, I mean, I'm not planning on spending like $6 million on that though.
Oh, NDA should be free. I mean,
Yeah,
it's the
exactly. Yeah.
same form NDA for everyone. So so there are two kinds of contracts basically. Um, and a contract is a great example of actually I think both where ChatGPT styles, let's call it chat style AI, where chat
Mhm.
style AIs fail, but also where they work. So let's take a step back, okay? And we don't do contracts today. We have thought about doing something for like patent licensing specifically. So here's a sense of how I think about the problem, okay? So how do people do it today? Is actually exactly as you describe. They have form contracts. And what they'll do is they'll basically start with the form. Sometimes like an NDA, it is so simple, you just take the form and fill in the party names. Anything more complex than that, you probably shouldn't sign unless there's a
Mhm.
reason, like it's a pharma company or it's like national security or something. Um, Sometimes though, it will be very custom because it's a very unique kind of contract. And so then what you'll do is you will, number one, oftentimes they'll have a bank of paragraphs separate from the
Mhm.
template, and they'll
Mhm.
pull in paragraphs as needed. I know that sounds really stupid, but lawyers actually spend time reading case law and writing those paragraphs for later use. And there's a lot of expertise in knowing which one to use. And sometimes you have to read it and tweak a word. And that one word can be the difference between winning and losing a lawsuit. So just so you know, listeners, your lawyers are not screwing with you. There's actually a lot of expertise that goes into it. And sometimes there will be things they don't have form paragraphs for, and they'll have to write it from scratch. So the job of being a lawyer is basically a mix of those three things. Picking from templates. They always start from a template. I've never seen a contract that didn't start from a template. Picking the standard paragraphs that has a lot of expertise that goes in, and then editing and adding as appropriate. Sometimes a lot. So okay, what are some times that it's better and worse? Oh, and I forgot there's redlining. These contracts go back and forth a lot. So you need to track and compare and decide what you're going to do based on these changes that opposing counsel has given you. Okay. So the very first thing I would say is you would want your AI to be document based. And you've actually seen some companies do this where they actually are an AI that lives in Microsoft Word. Some issues with that, but some reasons why that might be good. So then what you would want to do is you'd want to say, okay, first, I want this to be the best possible document editor it could be. Everyone uses Microsoft Word, but is Microsoft Word actually the best choice? By the way, for contracts, I don't think so. Because you have all these terms and you're like, well, what do they mean? Where else did I use them? Is there other stuff that's related to the contract that would be useful to look at to remind myself of what they are or use them while I'm drafting? So first of all, you want to think about like a contextual editor that provides additional information. Number two is you want the AI to be built in. So the AI needs to be able to complete many tasks. It needs to be able to look at edits. It needs to be able to draft edits. You'd want to be able to create things from scratch. You would want to be able to access a boilerplate bank and then suggest which boilerplate paragraph should go where, suggest definitions, and so on. You would also want to be able to draft things from scratch. You would also want to be very clear what the AI did versus what you did so that you know what to edit. So those are some things to consider. The last thing I would say, though, is there are times where chat style AI is really good. So a lot of times you have questions about the contract. And there's actually a task that AI is pretty good at. And you would say, I forgot, did I have an integration clause? I forgot, what state did I use for our forum selection? I forgot, what's our license fee again? All those kinds of things. Or I'm deciding between these two things. I'm deciding between, this having a royalty minimum or not having a royalty minimum. What are some of the trade-offs between that choice? And what would you suggest as a royalty minimum? Like, those are questions that you might have. And normally you would talk this over with a person. Being able to talk this over with an AI who's instantly available and instantly fast, that can be useful to help you ideate or to answer basic questions about the document. So in those cases, AI is actually really good in a chat format. So I think being conscious about what are the smart choices, how am I collating information for you, that's really important. Because I'll tell you one thing we've learned with Edge is that with these chat versions, one of the reasons we didn't do it was that you hear from a lot of people, I use ChatGPT, I'm not happy with the results. One of the reasons is that they're not prompt engineers, which they shouldn't be, right? Like, that's not a good use of your time. You're a lawyer who bills $500,000, $2,000 an hour. Why are you learning how to prompt engineer? It should just work without prompt engineering. That's number one. Number two is they don't always know what context to give. And so if you don't give the right context, it's the same as a human. Like, you won't know what to do. But because they're so in it, they're a lot of times people forget. They assume that something knows something, even though they learned it because they're deep in the job, but they forgot that in this specific context, you have to give it. So by having a deeply integrated system, we not only control the prompts and the output, we control the context. And so we can intelligently give good inputs, because good inputs make good outputs. And that's an important part of your product. It's not just the interface. It's not just the user experience, the UX. It's also on the back end. Not just the back end of like how I'm making it work efficiently. Am I using a vector database or RAG? Like, it's what am I doing to actually make the context good for this particular command to give my user a good output? That's what's really important.
I wonder, okay, so since like you have been innovating in the AI space, um, is there any new technology besides Edge that you are excited about, or like any other company that you feel like are doing something that's very differentiated? Because I feel like I've seen a lot of like, I haven't really seen much of like the patent space, but like in the legal tech world, there are so many company that's like helping you generate contract. Is there
Mhm.
any like interesting use case that you feel like besides like Edge, of course, like you feel like
Sure.
are very interesting in the space?
Definitely. I mean, they're not all out yet, so I can't
Mhm,
say all the names, but I see a bunch of people working on cool stuff in immigration. That's a
mhm,
great application because it's a great mix of forms. So again, good software, and then AI, because you have a lot of information you have to organize, collect, analyze, summarize, decide whether to include. That's a great. I've seen a lot of really cool workflows there. Um, of the ones that, excuse me, have been released, formally is a cool one. Another cool one I've seen is GCAI. And there are a bunch that are like, that's a great example of a chat-based one that I think works, because what it's trying to do is replace. So if you're an in-house counsel, which is who GCAI is made for, it's not made for outside counsel. A lot of what you do is answer basic questions for people. And basically having the first line of defense be AI, that's a really cool idea. And I've seen others too, but that's an example of one that I've seen. Um, and then there are a bunch of contract ones. And I would say that like the one I've probably liked the approach of the most is Spellbook, because directly integrated Microsoft Word, and it has comments and all that stuff. Obviously, I've sort of hinted that I have some issues with the Microsoft Word approach. But I would say they've done the best job at it for sure. Um, Another example that I've seen that where I think they've gotten certain parts of it really right is I'm not sure if you've seen Harvey before, but what I think they do well is they do a perplexity style citation, and I think that aspect of what they do works. That's like pretty cool. Um, but what I would say that the challenges I have with some of these things is I think that we're not ready for like the general AI that does all legal stuff. It has to be really specific, right? Like we're not trying to compete with some of these companies that I mentioned. Actually, none of them, because they're either super general, they're trying to do everything, or they deal with a very specific area of the law, which we do not deal with.
Mm,
And I think really it's like enterprise software, right? Like, yeah, there are some general computing platforms, but by and large, the successful enterprise companies, they actually got successful by understanding the workflows that they feed into and building specific solutions for those workflows. And yes, there's some generality to it. We're not talking about constellation style, true vertical software all the time. But I mean, I think you have to be relatively vertical to succeed in the legal area because there's a lot of nuances. I mean, it's $1 trillion industry, right? I think that there's a lot of, this is why I think a lot of times you need to have like real legal people on the team. It's like, who are you to say that this $1 trillion industry you're going to change overnight without having specialists who understand that field? Because
mm,
you have to get a JD. The D stands for doctor. Like every lawyer technically has a doctorate. Like you think that you're gonna. So the answer is no. What you have to do is really say which area do I care about, and make something that's really awesome for them, and then build off of that awesomeness for the next people you're going to tackle.
mm.
That's
I
how we, at least.
I wonder, so, like, I feel like there are so many like, I guess what would make or break one of these companies? So, like, the way that I from, like, a
Customers.
yeah,
That's it.
exactly. So, okay, who you're
Do
gonna
you have
basically
customers?
yeah, 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 okay. But in terms of, like, the customers, like, what is good look like in a very early stage? Is that, like, how big of the contract they've signed, or is that how diverse amount of lawyer they could attract, or, like so, like, is it like a volume game? And then because I also don't know how much longevity each company have, like, so maybe, like, because we're in, like, a AI rush, so, like, lawyer I'm sure, like, every industry is, like, very scared about, like, AI taking over everything, so they need to, like, either jump on board immediately to purchase everything to try it out,
Yeah.
or, like, they just do nothing, I guess. Like, I wonder how do you make sure, like, um customer lifetime value is, like, up? Or, like, what exactly are like, what should be a good benchmark on judging, like, a
Yeah.
legal tech startup?
I think there are a few. I would say number one is, do they get an annual or monthly contract? So what percentage of people at Edge, for example, 100% of our contracts are annual. Number two is customer expansion. So, one pattern that you see a lot is it starts with one partner or their group. So do they also usage? Are they actually using it a lot? So one of the companies I mentioned, I won't say who, I know a lot of
Mhm.
people whose firms have paid for it and the usage is not very good. And so you'd imagine they would churn.
Mm,
And by the way, the inverse of that is churn. Like a lot of these companies have not been around long enough to have churn numbers, but check
mhm,
in half a year and what are their churn numbers looking like? That's another factor I would look at. One other thing I would think of as an investor. So I think the investor is a mix of quantitative and qualitative. From a qualitative perspective, I would say, in terms of like the customer mix, for example, that you mentioned, you have to look at the industry. So for immigration, for example, that's an area that's a much more that's mostly smaller firms. I'm not looking at your mix. I'm just looking at the number of customers and what they're paying. And by the way, like how much they are paying too. I think that if you can't command at least 10x more than ChatGPT is charging, you shouldn't bother. Um, because it's just ChatGPT is going to continue to improve and get to be okay. And so there are going to be people who are on the budget who are going to say, I'm just going to use ChatGPT, and you're not going to beat that. So you have to provide enough value you can charge at least 10 times more per month. So that's another thing I would look at, how much you're pricing. Whereas in our case with patents, there are people who write patents at every part of the spectrum. So I don't actually really care if I was looking at another patent startup. Right now I'm not, because I'm going to eat them. But I wouldn't actually really care like, what does the mix look like for the quality? It might be interesting. So if you're only selling to in-house and you just can't sell to the other guys, right? That is interesting. That doesn't mean you're a bad startup. It means something about the nature of the product that you have now. And you should have an answer for why that is. And by the way, it should be an answer that you came to by talking to your customers. Qualitatively, one of the things I think of too is what can you build for your product? And this gets to the idea of customer expansion. So let's take patents. Patents are, as a whole, about $100 billion as an industry. Obviously, if you include the value of patented stuff, that's like the entire innovation economy almost. So let's just take the patent legal side, $100 billion. So how do you get a really good slice of that? Well, you have to be able to build more stuff. You have to be, and so I would look at it and I would say, like, okay, so I won't take any of the areas of law that I mentioned right now, because I don't want to crap on any startups. Let's say, how about let's take employment law. Okay, there's only really two things employment lawyers do. I guess three, really. They write contracts as in-house counsel to make sure that things get done, you don't get sued if something goes wrong, and they sue people. And there's a really narrow band of things that people get sued for in employment law. Like, there's discrimination, there's wrongful termination, but it's a relatively limited number of things. So with employment law, I would say, number one, how much can you really charge? The answer is probably not that much, because the contracts are relatively standard, and employment litigation, they don't tend to make all that much, and it tends to be contingent. So they tend to not get paid up front. They get paid based on the settlement of the judgment. Number two is, I would say, how many things can you really do? Okay, I have these contracts and I have a form editor for you. Well, now what? There's not much more for you to do. Or I can help you with the contentions and stuff for your various stages of law and response letters and so on for the various stages of litigation for employment. Great. What more can I do? You take an area like intellectual property. There's 5 years of work here. Plus, first of all, we have so much more to do for patents. I mean, there's like at least 2 years of work plus. Then there's international, because patents relate to each other internationally. Then there's litigation. Then there's other areas of intellectual property like trade secret, trademark, and copyright. And then I can build on that too. What are some other areas of law that might be interesting to us? Contracts. That's a great one, because there's so many kinds of contracts. I think you should pick an area that you care about and really master that side of contracts. But hey, now you've built more on it. What more can you do for that area? What more are there other kinds of contracts? That way you can build and offer more value, and then also sell more products to your existing customers on top of expanding your market of customers. And I think that's really, really essential in like what's good versus what's bad. But yeah, those are a mix of some of the metrics and some of the qualitative things I would look for. And one last thing, of course, is just, do the customers seem happy? If you talk to them, or you can look at the usage metrics, you can look at the expansion, but like, if they like it, do they actually love it? Are they telling their friends about it? I guess you can use NPS for that.
I have a question from like the investor angle. So I know that you also invest in a lot of like startups. So when you are looking at these companies, when you're diligencing, let's say if you just angel invest with a tiny bit of amount of money, um, would the founder send you their customer to speak to you, or like how would you kind of like navigate the diligence process?
Yeah, if you're the lead, they'll send you customers. If you're not, they're not going to connect you to a customer. But they might be willing to give quotes. So this depends on the stage of the company. If you're an early stage company, like, you probably don't have a lot of quotes yet, just because you're like, you don't want to bother your customers and so on. You may not have enough. But especially at the Series A and above, like, if you don't have customer quotes, that's a big red flag. You should be able to say, like, hey, here are examples of customers. Here are quotes of them talking about how much value we provided to them. And honestly, if you're running a small angel check, you probably won't get past the quotes, but still, like, and I would say at the seed stage, it depends. I don't judge someone negatively for not having it. Um, but if they do, it's a plus, right? Because to me, that says more about their stage of development than anything else. Usually, if you have an early stage customer, like if you're early stage, here's the thing: your product is always broken, and so if you have any customers at all, that means that either everyone freaking loves it, or you're solving a really painful problem, and so even if they hate it, they need it. So at
Mm.
the really early stages, you actually don't really need the customer quotes. It's nice to have them, but like really all you need to know is, do they have them and how fast are they growing? The reason why early stage VCs may want to talk to the customers is because they may want to get a sense of like, what's their NPS? Are they referring people? Are they likely to churn? Like that's why like lead would want to know that to get a sense of things that the numbers may not contain. As like a small check, you're not going to get that. It doesn't really matter.
I wonder, so like since you went through YC, I've always hear about like the story of like, before the YC demo day, everyone's deal it's like fight over by 600 VCs and it's like already done before the demo day kind of thing. I wonder like how do you like but does like the super popular deal always end up to be the best deals? And how do you like since like you coming from the founder angle, can you just walk us through like the experience there? Like how yeah, like basically.
Sure. So first of all, the thing about the 600 VCs, it's not quite 600, but it is totally true. Like it doesn't matter how good or bad your startup is. If you're in YC, unless you're one of the few that's completely failing, you'll get at least 100 people reach out to you. It's a mix of angels and firms. Um, and I will say this: all of the founders that have super hot deals are good founders. That, however, as any founder will tell you, being a good founder does not guarantee a good outcome. So there are actually a lot of the really hot YC deals, batch after batch, failed. The founders are all awesome. Like every one of those deals where I know where they are, I'm like, wow, this is a great founder. And that's just the nature of a startup, right? You have things that work and things that don't. Um, a lot of the most successful deals, look, some of them were super hot from the beginning, um, but a bunch of them like hardly raised any, hardly did anything. Like I remember there was a company. I don't know if this information is public, so I won't say the name. But the founder kind of mentored me a little bit during YC. They are doing incredible. They're at 100 million ARR. You know what they raised on demo day? Precisely $0.
How?
And this is before YC gave 500,000.
So, like, I mean, how do you really spot like a good deal in the YC batch? Because I'm sure there's also like the deals that are like, okay, that's completely like not good. And like, how do you even spot it? Like, 'cause there's so many deals in the YC badges, and like even like it's referenced by other investors. Sometimes it's
Yeah,
kind of like a hit or miss. Like, since like you, I know that you also like invest a lot, and like I wonder like at the YC badge, going through it like as a founder, and it's like and also, like, as someone who have invested before, like, what would be your suggestion to, like, the investment peers, like, or, like, the angel investors especially? Like,
it's the
so and also,
founders.
we're so expensive to, like, start with, like, because everything is AI, and, like, it's really like, the valuations are, like, pretty outrageous typically, and, like, I wonder what's your thought on figuring out, like, what's, like, gonna be a good company quickly?
Yeah. Look, if I'm being honest, the new YC deal is going to push out some angels on price because YC's new deal is two parts. One part is a fixed investment, one part is an MFN. And the MFN is actually like a significant chunk. So if you raise a too low valuation, that's what the MFN applies to, and you're screwed. They'll be diluted by like a crazy amount. So YC companies are basically like almost structurally excluded from raising even a single check at too low a valuation once they start YC. So those $10 million deals or whatever, they're gone. They're not coming back until YC changes from an MFN for part of their deal. However, who determines YC is still a good deal overall because they have the highest hit of unicorns of like any investor at that stage, period. So how do you determine who's doing best? I would say it's founders. It's all about the founders. Are they people who other founders think are smart? That's one of the things that's pretty interesting. Like, are they people who a lot of other founders will speak well of? Another thing is when you talk to them, do they have energy? Do they move fast? Do they, pivots happen a lot, but at least their
Mhm.
reason for why they're doing what they're doing now makes sense.
Mm.
And it doesn't mean that they have some like consultant quality analysis of the market. It means that like, you know, you talk to them, and honestly, I think that everyone wants to put on their smart hat, but I think a lot of times you got to take off your smart hat and put on your common sense hat. Like, does this kind of make sense? Like, do these seem like people who know what they're doing, who are smart, impressive, formidable people who move fast and who really they're talking about their customers and what their customers want, or maybe a real problem they had? And you know what? This does seem like a problem that a lot of other people have. Or even if it's not, it'll be a problem a lot of people have soon. Like Vanta is a great example. Like Vanta's problem when they started, a lot of startups did not do SOC 2, but their reason made a lot of sense. SOC 2 is a real problem. Every big company does it. And you know what? There's not a solution that makes it accessible to small companies, but if it did, the companies that had it would perform so much better and people would catch on. And it's worth so much money that I can charge an arm and a leg for it. Like, that's actually pretty sensible. And you would take that and say, okay, I buy this. You might pivot from it, but I buy it. And so you might invest. Um, you know, YouTube is another great example where like it was mobile file sharing. And you would say, you know what? A lot of people really do make video and cameras are getting better. So people are going to have more video. And it makes sense that they would want it to feel like Flickr because Flickr works so well. And so I buy that these guys can really make a Flickr-like experience for YouTube. And so you might invest. Because also the math would work out pretty well, right? I mean, the dollars for linear TV programming are so high. Imagine programmatic ads for video, and that's what it ended up being, right? I think that I've seen independent analyses that YouTube is worth like 200, 300, 400 million dollars today. So yeah, these are reasons that you might actually do those kinds of things. And yeah, that's how I would approach it. Really focus on the founder. Do they seem like the kinds of person or people who would be successful and make $1 billion company? And do their ideas make sense? Generally, like not just why they're doing the thing they're doing. And you'll see that with how they talk about their customers.
Okay, so I wanna be mindful of the time, so I'll, like, do, like, 1 real question and then 1-minute fire round, if that's okay with you.
Let's do it.
Okay. So one other real question is like, what was your like how does a YC journey look like for you? So I've heard a lot of my friends like apply like multiple years before getting in. And obviously after they got in, like they're doing pretty great. And I wonder like what was the journey like applying for YC and then like going through it? Like what was the program kind of like for you going through it? And like how often do you chat with other founders? Was that helpful? Like,
Yeah.
all that kind of thing.
Totally. So I had a similar thing. I applied, didn't get in. So I both applied early, didn't get in, was encouraged to apply on regular, and then didn't get in again. Then I brought on my co-founder, and we got in together. Um, YC is incredible. Um, it gives you the brand helps you close deals faster. The partners are incredibly helpful. Your peers are amazing. Me and my batch, my pod mates, we still actually do a call once a month.
What is
Um,
Podmates?
yeah, just YC is really big, and so they break it up into pods now.
Okay.
I think they call them groups technically. So
How
yeah, we
many
still
people
do
are
a
in a
monthly Zoom
group?
call. Huh?
How many people are in a group?
Like I want to say 20.
Okay. So, but like, do you guys like meet up like IRL like every week or something? And like, how is a pot like people are in like basically inventing in the same space? Like, you and like 10 legal startups, or like, how does that work?
They try to do that, but the most important thing is that you share the partners. So
Mm.
there's so many partners that you have like one partner you work with for your entirety of your YC journey, like until you IPO. And like you can call anyone, but you are encouraged to stay with this person who invests in knowing you very well. Um, and our main partners were, were Serby, Tom, and Nicola, with Serby being our main person. All amazing. I love all of them. Um, I would say that the biggest misconceptions people have about YC, your peers are more important than the program itself. So, like the most important thing YC does is they do a good job at assembling really great people. You get more value after the program than during, because a lot of the advice is actually available for free on YouTube. But like, I literally had a call last week with one of my partners who gave me advice that you wouldn't find anywhere. And that's insane that I can do that. And you can do that until even after your IPO. Like, it's pretty crazy. Um, number three is that it's a much less aggressive program than people think it is. Everyone hears that people work really hard during YC and they think, oh, it's because the YC program must be really big. It's actually really small. Like, I have a friend, for example, who is in another program that's competitive with YC. You've definitely heard of it. And she was doing like 20 hours of programming a week. I'm like, when do you work on your startup? Like, YC is not that way. YC is a lot of resources that you can draw on. And the program, you do have stuff every week, but it's like 2-3 hours a week. It's not that much programming. Like, the main thing they provide you is resources that you can draw on, again, for the entirety of the life of your company, that make you more likely to succeed, and a set of peers
So
who
what is
are,
the resources again? So is that like just like the partner advice,
that's a
I don't know,
huge
like Slack
resource.
or
Huge
something?
resource. They give you tons of deals. So like, you can get discounts on a lot of software. A lot of people don't know about the deals. It's crazy. I have like software that costs $20,000 a year. I'm paying $100 right now for it. So incredible deals. You have a forum where you can see other YC founders talking about issues that they're facing. You have a directory of information about investors, so you can see who screws over founders. You have information on other YC founders. I've gotten so much advice from other founders that I just emailed because they're in the YC network. And I was able to get their contact information through YC. And by the way, YC founders do not usually spam other YC founders. They know that that will get them in trouble. What they do is they like act really, it's useful. Like, there, for example, there's someone who already raised a Series A in my space, and I want to talk about how they were scaling their customer acquisition, because we're working on that. And it was really useful to just talk with the guy for a half hour about how he did that and was able to get to a Series A. And that was really cool. Like, that's something that you combine that with the advice we got from our partner about how to structure it to have a successful round and make sure that we're chasing the right metrics. Like, that's really good. And that's stuff that you are not going to find online, because it's too customized. It's too specific to your circumstance. And the people who would put that together just don't have the time. So yeah, it is so unbelievably valuable. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I got a lot out of the YC batch,
Mhm.
but I've gotten so much more out of YC after YC. And I'm not saying that as a criticism of YC. That's actually by design. Like, the most important thing from YC during the batch is demo day. The fact that there's this big event that everyone knows about, and there's pressure for investors to participate. That makes your seed fundraise so much easier. But at the same time, when you have after YC, you still want your company to succeed. And so the fact they provide these resources for you in perpetuity that you can't really find anywhere else, I mean, that's so much value. So YC is awesome. It's very hard to get in. I think it's sub 1% now, but it's awesome.
What do you think is differences between like the first two time that you apply that failed versus like the last time you succeed?
Oh, it's pretty easy. We made more progress, and I had an awesome co-founder that I didn't have the first time. So it's very simple.
Would you say because you had client, or like does like the customer side matter? So I've heard from like other founders advice, it's like you supposed to have some like traction or something. It's easier to get into different programs and stuff like that.
I don't agree with that. I think that what they want to see is really rapid progress. Sometimes that is an example. And obviously, if you have customers, that's great. But rate of change is more important.
Got it. Amazing. Okay, so we are at the end of the interview. I have like a 1 minute fire round for you.
Let's do it.
What's your favorite book?
Favorite book? I mean, I already mentioned Crossing the Chasm. I say one great one is Titan. It's a biography of John D. Rockefeller by Ron Chernow. Really, really interesting.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Career? Hmm. That's that one's a hard one. I don't know. Maybe Gary Tan for letting me into YC.
Did Gary Tenth like go through your interview or something, or like does he have to go through every founder interview or something?
Gary, no. Gary is a partner. He
I know,
participates
yeah,
just like
yeah.
any other partner. I guess it would technically be Serby. I guess she made the call.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to a dinner party? Well, you're certainly invited to one. Uh,
Thank you.
I mean, I would say probably the most interesting person I could have dinner with is Martine Rothblatt. Right now, she's the CEO of United Therapeutics. She previously started Sirius XM Radio. She's just brilliant. I would love to have her at a dinner party.
Wow. Where can we find you outside of work?
Where what?
Where can we find you outside of work?
Um, well, I have an 8-month-old baby, so right now, nowhere. Uh,
I feel you as a person with a 10-month-old baby. So, yeah, we'll do baby date sometime.
let's do
So
it. You know
that's
how it
good.
is.
Thank you so much, Evan. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a fun
Thank
chat.
you so much. I had a blast, and I'm excited to do it again soon, hopefully.
Awesome. Okay, let me just quickly